Welcome everybody again to another episode of the Idea Me Show. I'm Andrea McDonald, the founder of Idea Me. Idea Me is a global network, a podcast available in 40 countries worldwide, a creator series and mentor program. Our mission is to share knowledge of the future. This is the second show in our Resilience podcast playlist series. Today, I'm here with the founder of Blue Abyss, a training facility planned for the UK that will build resilience amongst astronauts. It has its own resilience story. Let's hear more. In your words, who are you?
Good morning, Andrea. Well, my name is John Vickers. I'm the founder and chief executive for Blue Abyss, which, as you very kindly said, is a next generation, if you like, extreme environment research, training and development facility to be built, first of all, in the UK with ideas to expand internationally thereafter.
Tell us about the facility. The pool is one of the largest of its kind, if not the largest of its kind.
Absolutely. So the plan is to build a 50-metre long, 40-metre wide, multi-level pool down to a maximum depth of 50 metres. So it becomes effectively the largest volume pool in the world of its type and the deepest. So to put it in perspective, an Olympic pool is 3,500 cubic metres and the first Blue Abyss will be 43,000 cubic metres.
Can you talk to us about the different scenarios?
This is a marine to space facility. So actually it works, we're looking to work with offshore energy initiatives and companies, subsea technology and robotics, as we are with astronauts. Actually, I think there's a huge amount of synergy and learning and technology transfer to be done from our maritime environment to space. But if you look at space, we're now increasingly getting used to the idea that humanity will be returning itself to the moon. Whether or not we manage to make the 2024 date that originally came out under President Trump, I think under the new administration in the US, they are still committed under the Artemis program to returning humanity to the lunar surface as quickly and as soon as safely as possible. I hope that is 2024, but I suspect it may slip, but it would thereafter be hopefully part of a widening and growing initiative. At first, we absolutely would concur that it's going to be a number of government astronauts, so fewer people under the guise of NASA. Thereafter, you can see other countries following the same route, whether it's the Chinese, the Russians, or some smaller nation using one of those bigger countries to piggyback upon. But I think thereafter, we would absolutely recognize, it's a new frontier. And typically with new frontiers, you get a few intrepid explorers to begin with, and then the market expands. Whether that's an orbiting space hotel, whether that's some form of additional workstation like the ISS, whether there are businesses that base themselves in space, or we go and claim resources or try and mine resources from the moon or asteroids, for instance. I think as those endeavours start to open up, you will see a transition from a few select government astronauts into what you might term a much more commercial footing, members of the public who apply to go and work and live in space. And our intention is to deliver at first an experience for people to what's it like to train like an astronaut and do so in a wholly astronaut-centric environment, i.e., it's approved by and has people who've done it, been there and done it effectively. And then going forward from that experience base, you have a number of people who think, look, if there is an opportunity, you have the wherewithal to come and do much more intensive training, weeks and months, not just a few days. And as careers open up, I think then you are looking at a much wider audience. But in space, more than perhaps any other environment, it's not just the intent of the individual. Would I like to go into? Yes. Am I the right person to go into space? I don't know, because I don't think it's a physical aptitude and it's not how intelligent you are, but it's probably more or less based eventually upon, at the moment, Andrea, your psychological resilience to stress. How would I cope in an environment which is wholly alien to us? And unlike deep ocean, where you're, from a human's perspective, you're a few 100 meters away from safety at best. In space, you may be a few 100 kilometers away from safety. I think it takes a very special individual to be able to live and work in space. And our endeavor in opening up the market is to equally Sadly, for the moment, tell everybody it might not be for you.
Your facility is not just or will not just be a training facility in isolation. There will also be a research element to the Blue Abyss entity. Could you talk about that, please?
Certainly. So predicated in the envelope that contains the pool building, we've always had a mind to celebrate one of the original researchers who helped put Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon, a chap called Professor Walter Koenig, who sadly is no longer with us. So part of the facility within that envelope of the building is to create the Walter Koenig Human Performance Centre, pioneered by my colleague, Dr. Simon Eberts. And in addition to promoting that maritime and space-related physiological R&D, so typically aiming at people, how do people behave underwater? What can we learn from their long-term exposure underwater and or space? The opportunity for us to create an R&D centric campus is being spurned on by a sister company, Sea Space Research.
So your entity, planned entity, will feed into not just nationwide science as far as the UK is concerned. It will feed into global science and ultimately human resilience overall. Can you talk about the progress of the project? You first started to think about it in 2014. It's been a journey of resilience in itself. Take us through the chronology and where you are now, please.
Certainly. Can I just go back, Andrew? You very kindly and rightly said, this is not just about the UK or Europe. This is an international effort. I would hope that humanity is starting to appreciate, and sometimes I think we're getting there and sometimes I don't think we are, that we're all interconnected. I always use the analogy, if you're underwater, and I suspect the same is true in space, you wouldn't care who was coming to help you. You wouldn't be guided by their religious beliefs or their orientation or the color of their skin. You'd be interested in the help they could give you. And to me, Blue Abyss has always stood for humanity first. Individual agendas can, wait outside. Thanks very much. With that in mind, so 2014, come up with the idea, some say stupidly, but here we are 6.5 years later. I think I've learned a degree of resilience. Resilience for me has been a very individual experience. It's less about, what can we achieve at times, and more about, am I prepared to go through all the sort of naysayers and all of the negative? If you're going to get turned down once or twice for something, you can probably put up with. But when you time and time again put months and years of effort and money and other people's time and their effort into an initiative, to have somebody with no real sense of longevity or ownership just say, we don't agree, you think, well, hold on a minute, this will make a fundamental difference. You agreed enough to take us on the journey. So that, but then they for often the most obscure or petty reasons. And I found that particularly challenging. I mean, absolutely. So it's a mental resilience that I think I've had to. Now, have I succeeded? Probably not, but I'm learning too. You just have to ride as the saying goes, ride the rough with the smooth. So we're now at the point where we're on the cusp of being able to finally submit our planning in a region in the southwest of the UK, a region who I'm really hopeful for their sake have made a transition from, look, please, come and help us. We need help. We're seen as slightly the poor man of England, for instance, into one of being an absolutely dynamic and thrusting environment in which businesses are being encouraged and initiatives are coming out of. And for me, that's just so exciting. We're not the sole proprietor to say, look, it's down to us. We've got to do all the heavy lifting. The region already has a fantastic feel about it. And so I'm encouraged about how we're being pulled as much as we're pushing.
And are you allowed to talk of which region that is?
Yes, so in Cornwall, actually.
You have an offer of funding, but the offer of funding is subject to a government guarantee. Could you explain to the audience in very simple terms how that works and what you have done so far at a prime ministerial level to try to make that happen?
Absolutely. So when you get to a sort of size of project that we're talking, Andrew, tens and in this case over £100 million, rightly, anybody that's going to lend you money, whether they invest the money directly in the company or they make it available as a debt facility, is going to say, what's the mechanism for this being repaid? How am I going to be assured that you're going to be successful? And there's only two routes really. Either we continue to look for, and we continue to do so anyway, commercial entities, government, university contracts who would underwrite. We can demonstrate in a pipeline, if people are familiar with that term, this is the amount of income we can see each year. When there's been a degree of uncertainty, because all the businesses we speak to across that whole spectrum of target sectors, there is nobody yet that I've come across of any significance, and we've talked to lots of individuals and companies who said we wouldn't use you. So there is a latent need, desire, interest, and opportunity that we are creating. But with the uncertainty of when are you opening and where, and which location is absolutely going to be behind you, so that it's not just we'll be opening, but we're not really sure of the long-term opportunity here. Companies aren't prepared to commit. The government have made this big, even last year in June and July, when we were starting to go through the first phase of the pandemic, the UK government, through the Chancellor, the Prime Minister himself, the Business Secretary, were all saying that we need to create new, bold initiatives in this country, infrastructure and R&D. And I would suggest that Blue Abyss fulfills both. So we have gone, and we've been in discussions for a number of years with the Treasury. But I briefed the Prime Minister at the end of October during an opportunity to meet with him about what we were seeking. And that is the alternative to, I've got all of these companies desperate to, as soon as I open the door, they're going to start paying me. We know that latent desire is there. So we've gone to the government and say, please don't give us money, but please provide our backers with a degree of certainty that if everything, there was another pandemic, the world suddenly went into a different sort of outlook, that the government would stand behind us. It's a bit like having the bank of mum and dad, Andrea, when the youngster wants to buy a house. It's a huge initiative. It's a huge sort of debt. The individual says, look, I'm working, I can repay this, but the bank still say, are your mum and dad prepared to put their second signature on the form? That's all we're asking. That commercially is available for a number of companies, and we're just looking to take up that opportunity.
If it never gets off the ground, heaven forbid, here in the UK, have you thought of taking it to America or another country and starting there?
We have. We've already got discussions about other facilities abroad in
Yes.
the US and the Middle East and the Far East. I think I would just be, personally, that would be a letdown for me. We have this opportunity in the UK, whichever way you voted about Brexit, the country has said we've made a decision. We want to reassert ourselves on a world stage that this is a country that has initiatives and people capable of helping take humanity forward. And I would suggest that Blue Abyss is one of those sorts of initiatives. It's a big, bold opportunity for the UK to put itself on the map, to sponsor not just UK or European centric R&D across maritime to space, but actually globally. It will inspire, hopefully, other people to think that they too can build facilities like Blue Abyss or something similar. So I would think personally, it would be 6.5 years to finally find that everything you've touched that says the UK is already a market leader in terms of satellite technology and offshore energy in terms of wind farms. We're continuing that. We want to continue that initiative. We want to grow the amount of space business that comes through this country. We want to increase the number of wind farms and new dynamics, so floating offshore wind farms rather than static offshore wind farms that are bolted directly to the seabed. There's a whole range between those two sectors, from defence to maritime, blue economy stuff, Andrea, that I think the UK stands at the vanguard of wanting to deliver. So why wouldn't we take on an initiative like this, which would help further those individual desires? This is a facility that enables. It's not about the facility. It's what we enable and who we enable, because they can do much more effective R&D, much more safely, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, prior to real world deployment. So you save an inordinate amount of time and money doing that. And if this country doesn't embrace something, whether it was me sat here or somebody else, then I think that for all the rhetoric, we're lacking that compunction to do something about it. And when you talk about something and do nothing, you just talk. Talk is cheap. It's until we start seeing action, then people get really behind you. And I think we've seen that in terms of people wanting to make a commitment are there, but they'll think you're just talking. Show me some action. I'll sign on the dotted line and give you a contract of how much we'll use your facility for the next 10 or 15 years.
Interesting to pursue the idea of endorsement further. There are 3 billionaires, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, and Elon Musk, who are pursuing space tourism, space industry overall. Google are also interested in planetary mining. These are all potential customers. I know we're looking at space again, and there's a whole other area of market for you, but just for argument's sake, looking at space again, potential customers for Blue Abyss. Have you had meetings with any of the billionaires?
We haven't had direct meetings with any of the billionaires, Andrea, and to a degree that suited me fine. I don't think per se that we want to get necessarily branded by anybody at this stage. This is not for one entity or another. I think what's missing in that story is that and it's fantastic, what Elon Musk and SpaceX have achieved and are regularly delivering for NASA and private companies in terms of taking supplies and humans back to the ISS from America's perspective is fantastic. Blue Origin have maintained a much more not secret in terms of it's not public, but just a less obvious sort of progression of what they're attempting to do. And Virgin Galactic, obviously, I think are aiming at a much more experiential tourist angle, whereas I think SpaceX and Blue Origin are looking at a much more long-term, much more commercial element. But in all of that broadly, what you don't hear from any of those billionaires, it's a bit unfortunate, I think, but when you go and speak to an astronaut, what you always hear is, well, so who's providing the training for these people? If something goes wrong on a parabolic flight, you would expect to have been given sufficient safety briefing and or there be sufficient staff to help eradicate, and remove you from that challenge. I don't think enough services, action's been paid to the low Earth orbit, suborbital experiences are something different. You're still doing it within the Earth's atmosphere, typically. The minute you transition into low Earth orbit and beyond, I think the pragmatism from every astronaut I've spoken to, and I've been fortunate to meet a number of them, not one has ever said, let's downplay the training. The rocket is bound to work. There's nothing, once the rocket, they light the fuse, you're going. Whether or not it goes up into space or you get blasted away in safety rockets take you away because the main rockets failed, you're literally along for the ride. But the minute you get into space, your body goes through a whole series of physiological changes, building up resilience to, look, crikey, I am genuinely in space. Everything's upside down. I don't feel too well. How am I going to cope if I wake in the middle of the night and suddenly panic? That psychological resilience is something that absolutely, when you go through astronaut training, is paramount. If you mention to any of those those billionaires, what are you doing about training people? I think I've heard instances where it's almost poo-pooed. And I think we've done ourselves a disservice. It's not prominent in people's minds that you will need to do this training. So why do astronauts do it? I think that piece will come out, and the failing entities like NASA, the Chinese Space Agency, Roscosmos, the Russians, the European Space Agency, are government agencies. They're not designed to cater for the mass market. Why should they? So we are looking to take that level of quality and capability and help the market transition to, now we can broaden who goes through that training. We may still fail people because the level of training is such that it's not suitable for everybody. But at the same time, if we want more people to be able to go into space, they won't individually. I don't need to be a rocket scientist or a physicist or a geologist in order to go into space, if I've got the capability physically, if I can afford it, and if I've got the psychological ability to put up with the conditions. But we're enabling that transition between a few and the many, recognizing that if I want to go, you want to go, Andrea, you need to prepare, you need to train, and you need to do so thoroughly. And you need to know that all your crewmates who go up with you have been trained to the same level. You can rely on them. If things go wrong in the middle of the night in low Earth orbit on a small space tourist hotel, and the crew member is the one that's injured or ill, how's Andrea McDonald going to perform then? And I think that we do ourselves a disservice. We don't even begin to ask the question. So I haven't seen much of that, but as sure as eggs are eggs, it's coming, and we want to be at the vanguard of it.
Can you talk to us a little bit? We've spoken about the sort of space environment as far as your potential customers are concerned. Can you talk to us a little bit about the oceans environment and who you would regard as the ideal customers? Just name some names.
Well, I would suggest that the ideal customers are offshore energy companies. So historically, will be the oil and gas major companies. And increasingly, obviously, the renewables. And we're predominantly, when we talk about renewables, we're talking about wind farm providers, whether they're floating or whether they're static. But it's less about those companies per se, believe it or not, Andrea, and I think it's more about their supply chain behind it. Those companies providing subsea technology, whether it's connectors, whether it's investigative tools, or increasingly, a thing that I'm a big passionate champion for, robotics. You know, humans are we're good on the surface of the earth, but put us underwater for any length of time without a breathing mixture, we're not so good. And the same is true in space. So I think the recognition is that as we continue to use, if we're going to continue to use our oceans, two things. Let's do so with a much more environmental awareness. Our oceans belong to all of us. So our willingness to exploit them has to be equally matched with our ability to sustain that exploitation and do so with a mind to what's the actual cost of doing this. Deep sea mining, extracting oil and gas, basing a wind farm, whether you physically locate the pylon on the seabed or whether you have it floating above. What's the long-term impact? Will it affect fish life? Will it affect how scallops are breeding? Does it get in the way of migratory birds or mammals? We need to have an awareness. And increasingly, we are also probably recognizing that the sea offers a huge opportunity to be very bountiful in terms of food, in terms of growing algae for food. But we need to be mindful that when we take out one species because we blatantly just cast huge nets out and we capture dolphins and turtles and apex predators, therefore we remove an amount of the sort of natural hierarchy in the ocean, there's going to be an imbalance. But we've probably treated that with a bit of disdain historically. Look at the size of the rubbish piles in the Pacific Ocean. You know, we talk about something the size of Texas or something, or even bigger. I mean, what a nation. If you were an alien and you came to this planet and the first thing you flew above was the Pacific and you saw all this rubbish littering it, you'd think, crikey, I wouldn't want to go to a public park where there was just a sea of litter. It would probably put you off. Yet we've treated our own backyard like that. And so I go back to somebody I took as a youngster. I was heavily influenced by in terms of appreciation for our oceans, and Jacques Cousteau. You know, that laconic French accent just inviting me into our world. This is part of our planet. There's a huge unknown about it. Still, there's new life being discovered. There's probably all sorts of minerals and valuable resources that we can utilize if we do so sensitively. So we're appealing in a day-to-day basis to the maritime sector to say we can support, and we've got engagement with numbers of subsea technology companies and robotics companies. I think robotics will continue to grow. And the bit that I was mentioning, I think that robotics is important because in space, we've utilized, you know, we've relied on a couple of people at a time, perhaps doing a spacewalk and fixing something on the ISS, or a couple of people at a time going to the moon. But as we make that much more of a sort of a regular occurrence, us going to the moon, so there'll probably be halfway houses refueling, space hotels, etc. We talked about that a second ago. How are you going to service all of those things? I don't think it's conceivable that Andrea, you've been invited to go to a space hotel for a week. And by the way, you're expected to pop out every second night just to make sure the antenna's facing back to Earth. You might want to do that, but I don't suspect that's what you signed up. Hold on a minute, that sounds a bit more than I bargained for. So why not have a drone, an undersea vehicle that's used to operating in a three-dimensional extreme environment? Why aren't we developing those now? And I think the UK can be a pioneer of delivering technology where we're already a pioneer in ROVs and AUVs. Let's take that into space. There is much more synergy between what we've got on this planet in terms of our oceans and space than I think people realise.
Looking at the timings, let's say Cornwall agree you can build your facility, the Blue Abyss facility in Cornwall. They put out the red carpet for you. Boris Johnson says, okay, the UK government will give you the guarantee that you need in order for the funding to be released. What is the time frame after that? Money comes in, now you have to build it.
We're progressing with an intention that we will be submitting planning within a few months, and that's the intention. That's the dialogue that's going on at the moment.
Okay.
Candidly, we obviously in the UK have the G7 coming up. It would be wonderful to be able to, on behalf of Cornwall, announce this initiative in Cornwall, providing a lift for that G7 and also the long-term legacy benefit. And as soon as we have submitted and received planning, which obviously we'd only submit planning if we were confident of getting approval for it. So we're making sure that everything is going to get is going the way to get approval in terms of what we submit. And then we've got an 18-month build plan. Some elements, so the hotel element of the two buildings that we're building as phase one, that may be open slightly earlier. Our intention to offer our own parabolic flight may be open slightly earlier than the main pool facility. The pool is by way and far the single biggest element of the construction, but 18 months. So from middle of this year, you're looking at the beginning of 2023, spring of 2023. Having said that a number of times, I recognise that people's cynicism would come to the fore. Oh, but you said that before. But here we have a region who I think are as intent in helping make sure that we are doing what we say, and down to making sure that we are in a positive light of what we submit meets with their approval proactively. Then I'm confident about this timescale, because what we've not had before is that tacit support. What we have now is that tacit support.
The total investment in Blue Abyss is 150 million?
Slightly more than that, yes. For this phase, first phase, yes.
First phase. And ultimately, going through all the phases, what will the total amount be that you need to?
We're looking more like 165, slightly, maybe perhaps slightly more than that. I mean, in the scheme of things, though, the number of benefits that money will bring because of the effect. I mean, we see ourselves as the centre of a much wider, business initiative. We're enabling a number of other companies to either relocate to Cornwall or start in Cornwall, or be able to provide itself, Cornwall, with the R&D capability. I think that, forgive the pun, is a drop in the ocean to the overall economic benefit that will be created.
How many, again, using or starting with space, focusing on space, how many astronauts, future astronauts at any one time will Blue Abyss be able to train?
So our endeavours at first, as I mentioned, are to offer experiential courses. So you perhaps come for a few days, a week, and spend some time doing the things, as an alternative to, right, we're booking a girl's holiday, to play golf somewhere, or a lad's holiday to do something on a beach. Come and do something meaningful and demonstrative and exciting. We're trying to keep it relatively modest. So a course will probably comprise 12 people. As we move into a phase where we work with perhaps smaller countries, perhaps the European Space Agency, etc., and eventually NASA and their ilk, it depends how many government astronauts need to be trained. You don't spend your entire time in the pool when you're doing astronaut training. And there are other elements that we will bring forward to help support that. But nevertheless, there will be outside things that you'll get from completely different companies. I think that the real transition will come within this decade, now that we're into 2021. Notwithstanding, we're all surprised in the end of 2020 or during 2020 and into 2021 about the world's situation. I think within this decade, we will see the rise of opportunities where individuals like ourselves, Andrea, much more, less perhaps individually wealthy people. So we've had a number of people who've gone to the ISS as space tourists, who spent relatively large amounts of money to do so. You know, that's not a fundamental business model necessarily, because you're not going to get every multimillionaire or billionaire wants to go into space. You need to recognize, I suspect we'd all accept that you need to recognize where the price starts to come down, so you widen the breadth of audience that are able to go. And I would see that starting to happen this decade. Where will they go? Well, it might be with Blue Origin or SpaceX just around the Earth. SpaceX are talking about sending space tourists around the moon. I personally think that might be a little, further few years away than's being talked about. And again, we haven't seen details of the space training. Axiom have talked about.
Sorry to interrupt you. That Elon Musk is partnering with Yuzaka Misawa from Dear Moon, isn't he, for that initiative? Yes. Just interesting for the audience to hear that 8 artists have been invited to be astronauts on that mission. And that's underway at the moment, isn't it? And there will be training involved, obviously.
Well, we hope so, Andrea, that there's not been any public sort of discussion about the training. But again, there's got to be the right selection. Just because you apply, I don't think should, well, let's see. If you had a 2-horse race and you said one person's prepared for this race and done all of the bits, they know how the horse feels, they know what their diet's been like, they've been over a number of jumps, and somebody who gets on there raw and has never ridden a horse before, I'd probably be putting my money on the former rather than most of the time. I think we need to see more, collectively. You cannot just expect to go into space and it all be hunky-dory. Sadly, unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. People are affected individually. Even the most robust individuals get a sensation of being space sick from a day to 2 or 3 days.
You've mentioned a number of categories in terms of the end user of the training courses. Have you costed out per person how much that would cost within across the different categories?
We have, within reason. Obviously, we're waiting to see what the market plays out like. So, for instance, Blue Origin haven't announced what their pricing will be for their potential suborbital experience. We know that Virgin Galactic have already released pricing details about their trip. The likes of SpaceX and Blue Origin, though, are keeping that fairly much under wraps, and so we're choosing to do the same. Astronaut training at the moment is about 18 months and, an order of tens of millions of dollars, pounds, euros to accomplish. I would have thought, in the same way that SpaceX completely put on its head, the price of a rocket launch and the price per kilo of material going up into space, we would be looking to change by an order of magnitude the cost of training an individual, government or private, to go into space.
So they're not figures that you particularly would like to talk about at the moment?
Not at the moment.
Okay. It's been wonderful talking to you, John Vickers. And just before we go, is there anything else that you would like to inform the audience of?
No, I think really, Andrea, first of all, thank you very much indeed for your time. We're grateful for that support. I think that in the UK, you have a fantastically inventive nation who just need to believe in themselves a bit more. And globally, when you get initiatives like putting humans on the moon, I think people's propensity is not to talk about the political divide or about from which country they come, but is to talk about humanity and the greater, more noble cause, about the excitement that builds for humanity. I just want to be part of that initiative. Humanity has got a great opportunity if we work we're living together. Let's start working together more collectively. It's a shame that in the 21st century, we've still got such, at times, isolationist and politically charged agendas, when I think there is an opportunity to step beyond that. When we leave the Earth behind, perhaps we'll eventually be able to leave some of the politics with it.
John Vickers, thank you very much for moving the human story forward, as we say on this show. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for being with us on this episode of the I, Dear Me show. Our mission is to move the human story forward by sharing knowledge of the future. You can find us across the internet on all the major audio podcasting networks at www.radioidearme.com, YouTube and Vimeo. Please subscribe.